Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Rules and Reference Committee to order. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Councilmember Herschel Craig, Michelle Mills, and Councilmember Priscilla Tyson for joining us today. Appreciate your attendance as we review the recommendations of the Charter Review Commission. We'll begin by recognizing the members of the Charter Review Commission who have been generous with their time and diligent in their review of our city charter. With us tonight are our co-chairs, State Representative Michael F. Curtin and Ms. Marshall Moore, who's Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs and General Counsel for the Central Ohio Transit Authority. We also have benefited from the experience and wisdom of our City Auditor, the Honorable Hugh Dorian. We're grateful to him for serving yet another tour on a Charter Review Commission. Thank you, Mr. Dorian. Unable to be with us tonight are Commissioners Jeff Cabot and Dawn Tyler Lee. We are very grateful for their service and contribution to this process as well. When Mayor Coleman and I announced the creation of the Charter Review Commission in April, we asked these esteemed community leaders to conduct a top-to-bottom review of the Columbus City Charter and make recommendations for potential revisions. The Commission's final recommendations include specific charter amendment language, suggestions to improve, clarify, or modernize the charter, and recommendations that the city conduct further research on sections of the charter that require additional deliberation. Thanks to the work of the Columbus Charter Review Commission, our charter will be brought up to date with the values that define us as a city, so that the document serves us well for the next century as it has since it was originally adopted by voters 100 years ago. The Commission's review was thorough, comprehensive, and at every step open to the public. The Commission held 7 working meetings and 2 public hearings. It received direct input from the community and heard many hours of detailed presentations from city staff. Like tonight's public hearing, all Commission meetings were broadcast and rebroadcast on CTV and are available for viewing on the Commission's webpage at columbus.gov/Charter Review Commission. Residents were able to submit comments through the website, and Commission news and updates were publicized via numerous press advisories, the City Bulletin, Facebook, and Twitter. This is the second Columbus City Council hearing on the recommendations of the Charter Review Commission. 3 ordinances drafted to place the Commission's recommendations before Columbus voters received their first reading at the Council meeting on Monday, July 14th. Council is scheduled to vote on the amended ordinances at its meeting on Monday, July 21st. Tonight, staff will discuss the amended ordinances, and Council members will have the opportunity to ask any questions they may have. We will also entertain public testimony and will accept speaker slips just as we are starting this hearing. The regular rules of speaking before Council will apply, and speakers will have 3 minutes to testify. Speakers are also encouraged to submit written testimony to Council, which will be shared with all Council members following tonight's hearing. Before I turn the meeting over to staff, I'd like to ask if our Commissioners, Commissioner Curtin, Moore, or Dorian, had any comments that they'd like to offer before we get started.
Thank you, President Ginther. We do not.
Thank you. Unless we have any questions or comments from council members at this time, I'd invite Brian Clark, our Senior Legislative Advisor, Columbus City Council, to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Council President Ginther and Council members Craig, Mills, and Tyson. So, as you noted, on July 7th, 2014, the Columbus Charter Review Commission submitted a report to the Mayor and City Council regarding 21 specific recommendations, 19 of which were for action by Council. On July 9th, Council held the first of 2 public hearings. This is a second regarding those suggested amendments. And on the 14th, 3 ordinances received their first reading before Council. Those ordinances are 1747, 1748, and 1749, 2014, They each propose a charter amendment question and receive first reading, as I said. They're scheduled for second reading on July 21st. Ordinance number 1 addresses, Ordinance 1747 addresses proposal number 1, which is city administration. That issue would place before Columbus voters the following issues: annual reports, Charter Review Commission, charter technical changes, City Civil Service Commission 3-year rule, equal rights and non-discrimination, the mayor's budget estimate, qualifications for Rec and Park commissioners, a repeal of the sinking fund, and various updates to the utilities section. Charter proposal number 2 regarding city elections is found in Ordinance 1748-2014. That would amend various sections of the charter with regard to elections. And then proposal number 3, city office holders, is Ordinance 1749-2014. This would put before Columbus voters various changes for the city clerk, the council, elected official compensation, ethics and prohibited acts for public officials, inability of office holders, open meetings, prohibited use of public funds, public records, and qualifications for city elected officials. Since receiving the Commission's recommendations, Council has received numerous public comments, and Council members have been briefed and provided their comments on the Commission's proposals. Based on those public comments and Council comments, we'd like to present several proposed updates or amendments to the Commission's recommendations that Council will consider this next Monday evening. The first is regard to the Recs and Parks Commission and their qualifications. This was a topic that received quite a bit of discussion during the Commission process. There are actually numerous iterations of this proposal that were put forward, beginning with a proposal that would require that commissioners live in the city of Columbus. The Council members have considered the critical role that this commission plays in our city government. The charter charges this commission with overseeing the construction and equipment and the custody, maintenance, control, operation, and administration of all the recreational facilities and public parks of the city. Because these are city facilities operated with city funds, numerous council members felt that the original recommendation best aligned the authorities of the commission with the need to be responsive to every citizen of Columbus. As a result, council is considering an update to the commission recommendation that would go from a commission where members must be residents of the city of Columbus, Franklin County, or counties contiguous, provided that a majority must be city of Columbus residents, and instead all Rec and Park commissioners would have to be residents of the city of Columbus. The next update is to the recall. There were a number of items that were brought to us by a member of the League of Women Voters who helped us sort of walk through a couple of the elections deadlines. This particular one is a recommendation for changing the time for calling an election should a recall petition be sufficient. Currently, the charter provides that an election would have to take place no less than 50 nor more than 90 days after council action. We're considering an amendment that would change that to no less than 60 nor more than 120 days after council action. This would make every petition election process the same in the charter. So we would have the same process for a charter amendment, an initiated ordinance, a referendum, and the recall. The next item is the deadline for ballot issue withdrawal. The same public commenter noted that what's referred to as a UACAVA ballot, which is the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act ballot, that's a federal law, requires that they have to be prepared no less than 45 days prior to the date of an election. As proposed, ballot issues would be able to be withdrawn 40 days before an election. This could create a conflict between the preparation and mailing of UACAVA ballots and the withdrawal of an issue from consideration by the electors. So again, council is considering a change from withdrawal prior to the 40th day before the election, and instead allowing withdrawal prior to the 45th day before the election. This would align this deadline with the federal ballot deadline, and as a result, either the ballot question could be removed before the ballots are mailed, or a notice could be given to those voters that should they vote on the issue, the votes would not be counted. The next item is council action on petitions. Under the current charter and state law, the city clerk determines the sufficiency of an initiated ordinance, referendum, or recall petition. In making that decision, the clerk is limited in what he or she may consider, and is limited to whether or not the petition met the signature threshold and whether or not it is legally sufficient. In every respect, this is a purely ministerial function. It's important to note that the city clerk is a council appointee and is not directly accountable to voters. To bring Columbus in line with state law and common election practices, this ministerial responsibility would shift to the council under the commission's recommendations. And because this process has been misunderstood by several public commenters, council's added an explicit safeguard that would state that no city officer may consider the subject matter of a petition when determining the legal sufficiency thereof, except as required to assure compliance with applicable provisions of this charter, general laws of the state, or ordinance of council. An example of a content issue that could be considered would be an initiated petition ordinance that is in fact proposing a charter amendment. That could be considered in determining legal sufficiency. But the subject matter, regardless of what it is, could not be considered by council in making that decision. This would be the same as it is now for the city clerk. For challenge to petitions, as mentioned previously, a challenge would have to be completed no later than 40 days prior to the date of an election, both in current charter provision and in the commission recommendations. In order to align with the federal deadline for ballots, we recommend moving this to 45 days. There are also some very minor technical cleanups to that language to make clear the intent of this section. The intent of this section is that once council or the clerk, in the case of a recall petition, has found the petition and signature sufficient, that petition is presumed to be sufficient unless it's proven otherwise at least 45 days before the election. So this would essentially be a challenge by an elector to the petition or to signatures on the petition. The next item is placing arguments regarding ballot issues in the voting locations of the city. Currently, voters have the benefit of arguments for and against state constitutional issues, but not city issues. The commission proposed a purely permissive section that would have allowed but not required council to provide articles for and against a proposal. Public commenters questioned whether council would be required to prescribe arguments both for and against. While we felt that this was drafted to be clear that we would have to provide both articles, to be absolutely certain, we've inserted the word both into this proposed language so that it's clear that if council does an argument for, it must also provide an argument against, and vice versa. As far as how this would work in the real world, the petition committee would be asked to submit a 200-word or less argument in favor of their ballot issue. Assuming that their argument met the charter requirements, this argument, along with the argument against the issue, would be placed in the voting locations of the city. Council's action in prescribing that language would be by ordinance, which is obviously a very public process, and the charter provides appropriate safeguards with regard to reviewing the argument itself. And the final update that council has considered is with regard to the Citizens Commission on Elected Official Compensation. Several council members expressed concern regarding the deadline imposed on council action after the Citizens Commission recommendations are made, specifically a 30-day requirement for council action on that recommendation. Some of the concerns expressed were that this would not allow council to consider the then current financial situation of the city or financial forecast for the city in passing that ordinance or making a decision regarding the recommendations. That both internal and external vetting of the recommendation may require longer than 30 days. And I think a preference was expressed that council would be guided, as it is now, by the provision that changes in pay require an intervening election before going into effect, and that would control when council took action on that recommendation, with the provision that council is required to act under this charter section. So then we get to next steps for these ordinances. If council approves one or more of the charter-related ordinances on July 21st, 2014, the following steps would take place. The clerk would certify the question or questions to the boards of elections prior to the August 6th, 2014 deadline for local issues to be placed on the ballot. Questions placed on the ballot would be a special election that was run concurrent with the general statewide election on November 4th, 2014. And Columbus electors would vote, and if a majority supported any issue, the charter would be amended as provided in the question. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that council members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for that presentation. I do have one question, and it's relatively specific around the timeline. So if Columbus electors vote and a majority support any of these questions, the charter would be amended as of the certification of those election results? Would it be amended as of January 1 in the following year? When would the amendments take effect?
So the simple answer would be upon the completion of the official canvass of the election results. That would align with the deadline in the charter for when a charter amendment goes into effect. But there is a provision that if there is another deadline established in the ballot question, that would be the deadline. And actually, for one particular issue, the repeal of the sinking fund, there is a recommendation that the ballot language reflect an effective date of that charter amendment of July 1st, 2015. So that particular item would be passed this November if Columbus voters voted a majority, but would not actually go into effect until next year.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any questions from council members regarding the presentation recommendations? We will now entertain public testimony. I have several speakers signed up, and if there is anyone in attendance that's interested in signing up, please fill out a speaker slip and bring that forward to staff. Our first speaker is Brian Shin. Mr. Shin, welcome to council chambers. If you'd make your way to the podium and share your name, address, any organizations you represent, and you have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you, President Ginther. My name is Brian Shin. I live at 137 Morse Road here in Columbus, and I am the president of the Stonewall Columbus Board of Trustees. I'm here this evening to speak in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment to the Columbus City Charter. The charter amendment in issue prohibits discrimination in access to city services and employment opportunities for the enumerated protected classes. This protection is important, especially for the Columbus lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, which is not protected under federal or state law currently. I had the privilege of serving for 12 years on the Columbus Community Relations Commission. And during that time, we saw many discrimination complaints based on sexual orientation and gender identity or expression when that class was added in, I believe it was 2006. The citizens of Columbus have nowhere else to turn for assistance when they suffer from discrimination in employment, housing, and access to public accommodations. There were no negative impacts to the CRC or to the city when these protected classes were expanded in, again, I believe it was 2006. So having these classes enumerated in the city charter is an especially important way to protect people from discrimination, and it has a positive effect of reducing discrimination, studies have shown consistently. It also sends a very strong statement about the importance of inclusion and equal protection of our citizens. It will hold future city leaders accountable to the charter because the charter is much more difficult to change than a municipal ordinance. It also has a very positive economic impact on the city and supports the efforts to recruit new employees and new employers who value diversity and an inclusive business environment. I want to thank Council for the opportunity to speak tonight in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. I also want to thank the members of the Charter Review Commission for their work, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Shin, for coming down this evening and sharing your thoughts on that recommendation. Any comments or questions from council members? Thank you very much for coming down tonight, sharing your thoughts. Our next speaker is Stephanie Coe. Ms. Coe, welcome to council chambers. If you'd make your way to the podium and share your name, address, any organizations you represent. Ma'am, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie Coe. I live at 1397 Gorham Drive in the city of Columbus. Good evening, President Ginther, members of council, and members of the Charter Review Commission. I'm a resident of Columbus and active in my community through a number of activities, including the Southwest Area Commission. First, I'm here tonight to thank the members of the Charter Review Commission and the staff who supported their work. I appreciate their commitment to our city and hard work to help us ensure that Columbus continues to be a strong community, setting an example for other cities. After reviewing the recommendations of the Commission, I ask that each member of City Council vote to support each of these recommendations. There are 3 general areas that I specifically wanted to address. I'm proud to live in a city that is inclusive, that supports the rights of all citizens, and takes action to make it clear to community members and visitors that we value diversity. Specifically addressing equal rights in the Charter sends a strong message to all members of our community that we, as a city, support equal rights. There have been extensive discussions regarding modifying our structure of government to have representatives elected by wards. I'm very pleased to see that the Commission did not recommend this change. I believe that each member of council should be accountable to all the citizens of Columbus. Each council member must be focused on what is best for our city overall. Columbus has continued to thrive and grow because our focus has been on multiple areas of Columbus and not just a single ward with the strongest voice. The future is bright for Columbus and all our citizens if we continue to work together as a single city with one objective, to improve the quality of life of all our citizens. Finally, as an attorney, I appreciate the Commission's work to make sure the charter language is up to date and addresses current legal issues. Again, I want to thank all the members of the Commission and urge all members of Council to support their recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Coe, for coming down this evening and sharing your thoughts on these recommendations. Any questions or comments from council members for Ms. Coe? Our next speaker is Trent Smith. Mr. Smith, welcome to council chambers. Make your way forward to the podium and share your name, address, any organizations you represent. Sir, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Trent Smith. I'm a resident of Franklinton, living at 308 West Park Avenue. And regardless of my organizational affiliations, tonight I'm speaking to council just as an enthusiastic member of the Columbus community. I first want to thank all of the commissioners for their hard work on these recommendations. It is always wonderful to have a committed community servants willing to donate their time to the good of the entire city. I myself am a regular attendee to city council meetings, and I was grateful to be part of council's community meeting last night in Franklinton. As an active member of the Columbus community, I am familiar with the work of the Commission and its recommendations. Not that long ago, I came before City Council asking members to protect neighborhoods and not allow tax dollars to be spent to fund political campaigns. I was pleased that Council agreed with my position, and I understand why Council took the action they did that evening to advance the questions to the next step in the process. The issue was eventually removed from consideration by voters because the petitioners failed to comply with the law during the petition gathering process. I stand here before you today to urge you to place before the voters common sense changes, making participation in our democracy process easier than ever before. By standardizing and modernizing the rules for petitions, charter initiatives, and recalls, Council can make the process more predictable from year to year and easier to understand for those circulating petitions. I am pleased that this Council is looking to open the doors to local government and not close them. I am equally pleased the Commission did not forward a recommendation to change the composition or the way Council is elected. As a leader in Franklinton, I know that when one neighborhood wins, it is not, as some perceive, a loss for another neighborhood. Those who look to pit neighborhoods against each other are not doing so in the best interest of Columbus, but in an effort to advance their own politics. In summary, I simply want to thank the Commission members, and I want to thank Council members, and I urge you to adopt these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for coming down and sharing your thoughts on these recommendations. Questions or comments from council members? Thank you,
Thanks.
Mr. Smith. Our next speaker is Joe Motiel. Mr. Motiel, welcome to council chambers. If you'd make your way to the podium and share your name, address, any organizations you represent. Sir, you have 3 minutes.
Joe Motiel, 167 West Cook Road. President Ginther, members of council, members of the commission. At a public hearing before the commission on May 7th, I made several recommendations that I felt worthy of amending our city charter. At the commission's June 11th meeting, one of my recommendations, which was regarding a minimum wage increase, was discussed briefly, and it was unanimously decided that my recommendation did not belong in the city charter. Comments were made by Mr. Dorian stating that he supports minimum wage legislation and a minimum wage increase, but not as a charter issue. Mr. Curtin also stated that he supported a minimum wage increase, but that the state and federal levels of government should handle this issue and not at the municipal level. It is my understanding that the Commission's primary obligation is to first and foremost determine whether a charter recommendation is properly suited to be included in our city charter. This would explain why there was no real in-depth discussion on the justification and benefits of the issue of creating a minimum wage standard to help eliminate poverty in the city and help tens of thousands earn a standard of living that will take them closer to a middle income level. With all due respect to the Honorable Mr. Curtin and Mr. Dorian, the current division and backbiting in Congress and our General Assembly regarding a fair and sustainable minimum wage increase does not look promising for the working poor of this city, state, or country. The current minimum wage is a continuation of exploiting and capitalizing on a workforce that is powerless to the corporations and lobbyists that control our government. The economic disparity between the wealthy and poor grows further and further apart by the day. The 170,000 plus persons of poverty in the city of Columbus can wait no longer. At the Commission's June 11th meeting, City Council liaison Mr. Brian Clark gave a brief history and read some comments which were made by the first Charter Commission of 1914. And I quote, "No longer will members of the General Assembly elected from outside districts be permitted to dictate how Columbus shall administer its own necessities or solve its own local problems. The Charter's framers intended that Columbus please its own path, and the City of Columbus shall make full use of its home rule authority." Now, I can't think of anything more fitting that speaks to these words than placing the matter of income inequality and poverty as a local problem and setting a standard local minimum wage. In closing, I just want to leave with these comments. As you know, this past May, 50 years ago, President Lyndon Johnson gave his landmark Great Society speech when he stated that poverty and racial injustice have no place. And in 1968, just before his death, Dr. Martin Luther King was on his mission to bring the issue of poverty to the forefront of the Human Rights Campaign. Dr. King stated, "Poor people are forced to pay more for less, living in conditions day in and day out where the whole area is constantly drained without being replenished. And the tragedy is, so often these people are invisible because America is so affluent and so rich. We have the resources to get rid of it, and the real question is whether we have the will to do so." Thank you.
Mr. Motil, thank you for your passion, for your advocacy, and your thoughtfulness. Appreciate your engagement with the commission and with council tonight throughout this process. Any questions or comments for Mr. Motil from council members? Councilmember Tyson.
Thank you, President Ginther. I would just say thank you for coming down, and certainly I'm sharing your thoughts regarding poverty and the issue of around the wage disparities within our community. Certainly, as a council, I certainly know as and the mayor, if I speak for Mr. Dorian, the city certainly does. We're focusing on this issue, working with a lot of partners regarding poverty. Is there more work to be done? Certainly there is. Is the Charter Review Commission, is this part of our charter? I'd probably say it's not, but I certainly would say that we need to continue to have these types of discussions and know that we care passionately about everyone in our community and are certainly focused on this issue. Thank you for coming down.
I know Mr. Clark also stated something about there being, there is an ordinance for paying certain employees through contract through the city. It's about $13.13 an hour, I believe it was, for landscaping and custodial work and such. But, you know, I guess as you just said, as a charter, I guess in principle, I think it's important that you let the voters decide. But as an ordinance, you know, I would be supportive of something like that as long as there was as long as what the language was in terms of conditions and terms and what have you, and the amount of pay, things of that nature. But, you know, again, as a charter thing, it's really about, to me, about letting the people decide. But as an ordinance, you know, I would be more than happy to be supportive as long as, you know, I could see what the language of that was first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motil. I'm not sure if any members of the commission want to respond. I know that Mr. Motil has presented ideas and shared ideas with you all along the process. I'm not sure if there's anything additional you'd like to add based on his proposals and recommendations. Our final speaker this evening is Ann Hammerstein. Hammerstein or Hammerstein? You're right the first time. All right, Ann Hammerstein. Welcome to council chambers. If you'd share your name, address, any organizations you represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Council President Ginther. Council members, I'm Ann Hammerstein, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus, and I appreciate the opportunity and the openness of this process and the hard work that council, and this committee, and the Charter Commission has undergone in reaching its recommendations. Obviously, appreciate the Commission taking into account the concerns raised by a member of the League, and also the openness and the recording of the hearings for the citizens to view at later times at their convenience. And I also wanted to note the importance of modernization of the city's charter, and that it should be done with an eye to enhancing citizens' rights to propose and pass legislation for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hammerstein, for coming down and sharing your thoughts and your participation and recommendations from the League during the process. Any questions or comments from council members? Well, that is all the public speakers that I have this evening. Are there any comments, questions from council members or from members of the commission? Councilmember Craig?
President Ginther, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Had the chance to weigh in at the last public hearing. I just wanted to again reiterate my deep appreciation for the commission and the work of the commission. You know, this has been a process that has required due diligence, work, and certainly the thoroughness that you presented throughout this process. The openness for the public has been extremely important. This is a document, should council decide, and we have the responsibility of looking at this document very carefully and very thoughtfully, that will weigh to the public. So I wanted to certainly acknowledge your work, your thoughtfulness, all of the speakers tonight that has given of your time. These are important issues that will affect how we do our work, certainly how we represent the families and children in the city of Columbus and other entities. Thank you, Mr. Dorian, again, for your long-term committed service to our city. Every opportunity that I get, I want to make certain that we do that. We're deeply honored by your commitment, long-term commitment to our city. Certainly to Chair Curtin and Co-Chair Moore, we appreciate all of your work and all of the commissioners. And I wanted to certainly thank staff for their extremely hard work and thoughtfulness in this process. I think this document is a document that the public can be proud of. I see the council clerk present as well, and all of the staff that are present here today. I look forward to our continued work, and sure, as the public sees this a document, to understand that a lot of work has gone into this. And so thank you very much for the comments.
Any other questions or comments from council members? Anything the members of the, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Tyson?
And I certainly just don't, I would agree wholeheartedly with all the comments that Councilman Craig just stated, and just again, to just give my public thank you for, you've done just a yeoman's job. And I know that each of you have, major responsibilities in the community already, and to give your time and your talent to this issue, I want to just say thank you. It is so important for the residents of our community, and I really do appreciate the work that you have done in presenting the charter recommendations. And two, I want to thank the staff. I know Brian and Sherry, thank you so much for your work, and so just appreciate what you've done, and thank you so very much.
Any comments from the members of the commission? Anything you'd like to share this evening? Ms. Moore?
Thank you, President Ginther. I just want to thank you and the mayor for entrusting this important work to us. We appreciate the council members' expression of gratitude, but I know I'm speaking for the entire commission when I say it was an honor to serve. So thank you for entrusting this work to us.
Thank you, Council President Ginther. I just thought I would note that it was tremendously gratifying to see, and I think it speaks to a character trait of this community, that even folks who we knew out there were passionately in disagreement with things we were doing or not doing in terms of our recommendations. People who felt that we were just not addressing things that needed to be addressed, such as Mr. Motil's comments tonight. We were approached at every juncture of our proceedings over 3 months plus. Even those who disagreed most strenuously with us did so in an intellectually honest manner. They did so in a very civil manner. Many of these issues, people of goodwill can have many disagreements about, and I just was heartened, quite frankly, by the level of personal demeanor and civility and courtesy that everybody all around the table displayed to each other. And if we could clone that and send it over to the State House, I'd be one happy camper. Thank you.
My previous offer to co-chair Curtin stands, and he knows what that is. Before we adjourn, I would once again like to thank our commissioners for their diligence and service. On behalf of the mayor, my council colleagues, and the residents of this great city, thank you for all that you've done to make sure that our charter remains, in the words of co-chair Moore, a living document evolving with the needs and expectations of the citizenry it serves. I'd like to recognize the many staff members who have devoted so much time and effort to this endeavor. Thank you to City Attorney Rick Pfeiffer and Chief Counsel Josh Cox, Sherry Kish from the Mayor's Office, City Clerk and Commission Secretary Angie Blevins, and Cheryl Austin from the Clerk's Office, and the various department directors and staff who presented to the Commission. And finally, thank you to Brian Clark from the Council's Legislative Research Office, who has worked so tirelessly to make this process thorough, smooth, and successful from start to finish. We, as a council, are very fortunate and grateful to have Brian on our team. No other comments or questions? Thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks for all your work towards this process.